He never even noticed. That's what made it perfect. Somewhere, on a random weekday morning, my ex-boss opened his work email between meetings, and there it was, a thank you note for a donation to cancer research, made in honor of a man he tortured until the day that man died. He didn't do a single thing wrong to receive that email. That was the whole point, Dot. If you've ever watched someone genuinely good get crushed by someone genuinely cruel and felt that helpless rage build up in your chest with nowhere to go, this story is for you. Stick around, because by the end of this, you're going to feel exactly what I felt the day I hit submit on that donation. Smash that like button, subscribe if you haven't, and let's get into it. Let me take you back a few years, to a job that wasn't glamorous, wasn't the kind of thing you'd brag about at a dinner party, but was honest work. The kind of job where the people running the floor mattered more than anyone in a corner office ever understood. And the man who ran our floor, I'll call him Jacob, was the best boss I ever had. I remember my interview with him like it was yesterday. He didn't sugarcoat anything. He laid out exactly what the job demanded, exactly what he expected, and then he said something that stuck with me for years. That people like us, on the ground, doing the unglamorous work, were the reason corporate could function at all. Without us, none of it worked. He meant it. He wasn't just saying it to make new hires feel good. You could see it in how he ran things. He protected his people. For a year, maybe two, things were good. Then corporate brought in a new regional boss. I'll call him Dale. Dale arrived with a reputation already trailing behind him like smoke from a fire he'd started somewhere else. Other facilities knew him. My own brother, who worked elsewhere in the same corporation, heard Dale had been promoted and just sighed. That's how you knew. Customers didn't like him. Staff didn't like him. And somehow, this was the man now standing above Jacob. Here's the thing about our department. It was massive. Jacob managed not one, but two departments, about 75 people combined, while two other, much smaller departments, 30 people each. Each had their own dedicated manager. This had always been a two-manager job. Jacob knew it, and for months, he'd been asking corporate to just bring in a second person so the workload wouldn't bury him. Eventually, they did. They hired a woman I'll call Kathy. You'd think that would have fixed things. It didn't. It just gave Dale a second weapon. Kathy had zero experience in our line of work. None. Meanwhile, there were internal candidates. People with 15, 20 years of leadership experience running major projects across the company, who'd applied for that exact position and been passed over. The only thing Kathy had that they didn't was an office next to Dale's. Make of that what you will. Once she started, most of us couldn't stand working under her. She'd assign projects that made no logical sense, push ideas that anyone with actual floor experience knew would blow up the timeline, and somehow it was always someone else who had to clean up the mess. But Kathy was a symptom. Dale was the disease. About a year after Dale took over, Jacob finally told a few of us what had been happening behind closed doors. Write-ups. Constant write-ups. Not for anything that mattered. For a paint job that wasn't quite the right shade of red. For not staying 2 extra hours past his scheduled shift to cover something that wasn't his responsibility. Jacob had worked in this industry his entire adult life, across multiple companies, and told us flatly, he had never, not once, in his whole career, been written up before Dale showed up. He was less than 5 years from retirement. And he told us, half joking, half serious in that exhausted way people get when they're truly worn down, that he was thinking about quitting and going to work the register at McDonald's, just to get away from the environment Dale had built. We reported it. Or he did, over and over. Corporate did nothing. HR did worse than nothing. They basically implied Jacob was exaggerating, maybe even lying, and sided with Dale every single time. Imagine that. 20 plus years of a clean record, and the moment it mattered, the system trusted the guy with the bad reputation over the guy who built the department from the ground up. Then came the spring projects, and then came the moment none of us saw coming. During an interview, in front of witnesses, Jacob fell asleep. Kathy, to her credit, this is the one thing I'll give her, went to Dale and said she was worried about his health. Dale's response wasn't concern. It was opportunity. He put Jacob on temporary leave, and within what felt like days, hired a replacement. The replacement was 18 years old, barely out of high school. No experience whatsoever. Now the two biggest departments in the building, 75 people's worth of responsibility, were being steered by someone who'd never managed anyone in his life. One of my senior coworkers mentioned, almost in passing, that she'd seen Dale and this new kid together at church. Regularly. Talking. You can imagine what that did to morale. It confirmed what we already suspected. This had nothing to do with qualifications and everything to do with who Dale liked having around. At this point, we all assumed the same thing. Dale was building a case to fire Jacob. The write-ups, the sudden leave, the instant replacement. It had the shape of a man clearing a path. We braced for the call, telling us Jacob had been let go. That call never came. Something worse did. A month into his leave, after doctor's visits, head scans, blood work, Jacob got his diagnosis: secondary lymphoma. It had traveled to his brain. He passed away 1 or 2 days after finding out. I want you to sit with that for a second. The exhaustion Dale wrote him up for? The falling asleep during that interview that got him pushed out the door? That was never negligence. That was never Jacob not caring enough. His body was shutting down, and instead of anyone showing an ounce of concern, he spent his final working days being punished for it. When the news reached us, it broke something in the whole floor. People who'd been there for years cried in the break room. I cried too. But somewhere underneath the grief, something else was building. Something sharper, colder. I made a decision right there. I would grieve. Just not yet. First, I was going to get even. Here's the thing about revenge against someone like Dale. You can't touch his job. You can't touch his reputation with corporate, because corporate had already shown you exactly whose side they were on. So I didn't aim for any of that. I aimed somewhere he couldn't see coming and couldn't undo. I went to St. Jude's website. I found their lymphoma research donation page, and I set up a recurring monthly donation. My own money, no question about that. But I used Dale's work email address and his work mailing address as the contact information, if you've ever donated to St. Jude. You know they give you the option to make the gift in honor of someone. I typed in Jacob's name. Then I hit submit. I pictured it more times than I probably should have. Dale, sitting at his desk, scrolling through his inbox between whatever petty write-up he was drafting that week, and stopping on an email from St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. A thank you for his generous monthly contribution to lymphoma research, made in honor of Jacob. The man he wrote up for being tired while he was dying. The man he pushed out the door instead of checking in on. Now permanently, quietly, tied. In an official donor record, in his own inbox, possibly in follow-up mail arriving at his desk, to the very disease he never once acknowledged. He probably read it in confusion. Maybe he assumed it was spam and deleted it. Maybe he unsubscribed 5 seconds later. Honestly, I didn't need him to keep getting them. I didn't need a long con. I just needed that one moment. One single email, sitting in his inbox with Jacob's name attached to it, forcing his eyes to land on the name of the man he destroyed. Whether he felt a flicker of guilt or nothing at all, the record existed. Somewhere, in a system he couldn't control, Jacob's name was permanently linked to him doing something decent, funded by the very person he'd wronged. There was no way to erase that irony once it existed. That was enough. It was never about making him suffer the way Jacob suffered. Nothing could equal that. It was about making sure Dale couldn't simply move on clean, like Jacob was just an inconvenient name in a personnel file he'd successfully closed out. This happened years ago now, and honestly, the anger has mostly faded into something quieter. Just sadness that a genuinely good man spent his last working months being punished for dying instead of being cared for. I ended up buying a small pin, a little Asian blue bee, with a tag that reads, "Be thoughtful." It sits somewhere, I see it often. Not as a joke. As a reminder that you never really know what someone is carrying, and the cost of treating people with basic decency is so much lower than we act like it is. If this story hit you the way it hit me, do me a favor. Hit that like button, and down in the comments, tell me, have you ever watched someone good get pushed out by someone who didn't deserve to be in charge of them? Or better, have you ever gotten your own quiet, perfect piece of justice? I want to hear it. And if you want more stories like this one, make sure you're subscribed, because there are plenty more where this came from.